The center, the big man, the tallest, strongest, and most dominant player on the floor, the most impactful and important position in basketball history. The NBA has historically been controlled by dominant big men, from guys like Wilt and Russell in the 60s, to Shaq and Hakeem in the 90s, to currently with guys like Jokic and Giannis. The NBA has always been controlled by superior big men. Although we've seen great big men in every era of basketball, how have these players generally changed and adapted to the game? How have these giants evolved to the game around them? Well, in today's video, we're going to dive deep into this process and explore the evolution of centers and power forwards, aka big men. Before this video starts, don't forget to like and subscribe for more banger videos like these. We're going to start it with the very beginnings of the NBA. The first period we have is the 50s and 60s. In this era, we saw dominant big men like Bob Pettit, George Mikan, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell. This era for bigs was like the blueprint for the following NBA history that occurred. Simple fundamentals of the game like boxing out, posting up in the paint, outlet passes, finishing close to the basket, and low post defense were popularized and sharpened upon in this era. George Mikan was the very first GOAT of the NBA. Although he only had a very short 6-year career with the Minneapolis Lakers, he was very effective in those years, averaging 23.1 points per game and 13.4 rebounds per game. From 1948 to 1953, he had a 5-year gap where he averaged over 25 and 14 a game. He was also a 4-time All-Star, 3-time scoring champion, and won an MVP. He was the first one to set the standard of a truly dominant big. Because of Mikan's dominance, the NBA changed the lane from 6 to 12 feet, and his drill, the Mikan drill, also had become very popular today amongst bigs. Bob Pettit is another great example of centers who pioneered the way for dominant bigs. He had an 11-year career where he averaged an impressive 26 and 16. He was actually an all-star for every season he played, along with being a 2-time MVP and an NBA champion, and more. A player that doesn't get talked about enough in my opinion. And now, the 50s and 60s wouldn't be complete without these two behemoths in Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. I mean, there's really no explanation needed for these two gentlemen. Bill Russell is the most successful athlete of all time in terms of team success. He showed the league how important it is to have a strong and amazing big man to win championships. He really set up the formula for winning championships for the rest of the league. Although Wilt Chamberlain doesn't have the same team success as Russell, he more than has him in terms of offensive production and numbers. I mean, there's never going to be another Wilt Chamberlain. No one will ever come close to the records he put up, like averaging 50 and 25 in a season and scoring 100 points in a game. I could ramble on and on about his stats, achievements, and athletic abilities, but I want to keep this video to a somewhat reasonable length. Eventually in 1964, the NBA again changed the lane length from 12 to 16 feet to help minimize Russell and Wilt's dominance down there. To really conclude here, these main centers helped revolutionize the league by demonstrating the power of strong and supreme big men and how much they can contribute to a team's success. The 70s as an era for centers showed the carryovers the pioneering bigs of the 50s and 60s had. We saw a lot higher quantity of dominant bigs like Artis Gilmore, Dan Issel, Bill Walton, Nate Thurmond, Moses Malone, Dave Cowens, Bob McAdoo, Mel Daniels, Wes Unseld, Bob Lanier, and of course the father of all these bigs, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think during the 70s you saw several new different types of play styles through these bigs as a result of different sizes and higher quantity of great centers. You had the good old reliable back to the basket and bruising type of guys like Bob Lanier and Moses Malone, who used their physicality and brute strength to get the job done. You had guys like Bob McAdoo, Dave Cowens, and Wes Unseld using their quickness, being shorter, and a reliable jump shot to have their way on the floor. You had guys like Nate Thurmond, Artis Gilmore, and Bill Walton, who used their supreme height and athletic abilities to grab boards and defend the basket. And then you have the greatest big man of all time, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was just in a whole different stratosphere above these guys. There wasn't any huge changes here, just different play styles as a result of natural growth of the league. The 70s also saw the narrative that it took a superstar center to win reveal itself to seem more truthful than ever. During the 70s, only centers won the award. Yes, no guards or forwards even won it once. From the year the MVP award was introduced until 1983, the award was only won 3 times by a non-center. Bob Cousy in 1957, Oscar Robertson in 1964, and Julius Erving in 1981. There was a 17-year streak of only center won MVPs from 1964 to 1981. Pretty crazy if you think about it. The 1980s was a period of passing the torch to the next generation of big men. Although you still did have your dominant centers in this decade like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Moses Malone, Robert Parrish, and Bob McAdoo, they were all declining in their careers at this point. I also made this claim because you had some of the most iconic and historically great big men drafted in this era, like David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, you could even say Charles Barkley. They were the next generation of bigs that would eventually dominate the next decade we'll eventually talk about soon. The 1980s also put the narrative to rest that you can only win or dominate the league with a superior big as your best player. In the 80s decade, only 3 of the 10 MVPs were big men, being Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1980 and Moses Malone twice in 82 and 83. We saw the rise of more guard or forward dominant teams rise to the top at this time. I feel like a result of this was because of the implementation of the three-point line in 1980. This gave guards the ability to affect their game a lot more because it rewards great perimeter skills, aka shooting long shots. Having the Larry Bird Celtics, the Showtime Lakers, led primarily by Magic Johnson at this point, and the Jordan Bulls really gave the league a much needed balance of power between perimeter and post players. It was healthy and just refreshing for the league to see dominant guards. The 90s saw some of the most iconic big men of all time take the floor. Guys like Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, David Robinson, Tim Duncan, and so many more left unforgettable legacies. The way they impacted the league was amazing. From the Michael Jackson-like dance moves Hakeem was pulling down in the paint, to the overtaking low post dominance and excitement Shaquille O'Neal possessed, to even more fundamental bigs like Robinson and Duncan in San Antonio. The league was impacted in so many different ways. The 90s was probably the most exciting time to watch centers or basketball in general. They don't call this in the 80s the golden era of basketball for nothing. But unfortunately for this video, the big men weren't the main reason 90s basketball was remembered. It was because of this bald gambling addict that 90s basketball was so iconic. Because of Jordan, many of these dominant bigs weren't able to maximize what their careers could have been. Although Hakeem's Rockets got their 2 rings at the best time when Jordan was retired, they could have won even more without him. But Hakeem's situation wasn't even that bad compared to the next ones. Karl Malone couldn't get a ring, losing back-to-back years against Chicago. Jordan also robbed Charles Barkley, Shawn Kemp, and Patrick Ewing of rings. And Shaq needed to not only switch conferences to at least attempt to make the finals, but had to wait until MJ retired to get his first rings. This guy, Michael Jordan, he's really been hogging the spotlight on my channel too much recently. Some rule changes in the 90s include enforcing hand check rules, shortening the three-point line, and adding the restrictive zone, all aimed to help guards and offensive production rise. The 2000s for big men felt like a huge setback. Because of the dominance of several big men, but mainly Shaquille O'Neal, the league had to adopt more rule changes to slow these centers down. Some of these important ones were adding a 5-second back to the basket violation, bringing back zone defense, and adding a defensive 3-second violation in the lane. These rules achieved their goals for the most part by limiting the effectiveness of these physically supreme big men. Because of these changes in the game, there was also changes in the play styles of big men. For example, teams now started to use their bigs as pick and roll men to maintain their efficiency offensively. Teams like the Suns with Amari Stoudemire and the Magic with Dwight Howard are good examples of this. You also saw many bigs who were pretty useless offensively, but only benefited their team defensively. Players like Marcus Camby, Ben Wallace, Tyson Chandler, and Joakim Noah are good examples. During the 2000s, it was better to be a power forward than the center. Many of these great power forwards in the decade saw a lot more success compared to other eras. Because of the new rule changes, you needed a big who was more versatile, well-rounded, and mobile. I feel like power forwards were just better in these categories. So you saw several teams start to play small ball and put their power forwards down to the center. Examples are the Spurs with Tim Duncan and KG with the T-Wolves. The 2000s decade was a decade of new rules, players adapting and adjusting to them. The 2010s was a split era for big men. The first half of the 2010s, from around 2010 to even around 2016 or 17, saw a real decline in the dominance of centers. I mean, if you really think about it, the best bigs in this time period were an inconsistent, injury-prone Dwight Howard, the Gasol brothers, Blake Griffin, DeMarcus Cousins, and you could maybe say Dirk or Duncan during the very beginnings of this era. clearly at an all-time low compared to past generations. I think it was a result of the effects of the 2000s rule changes trickling their way down to the next generations. The NBA gave guards and forwards more power and they ran away with it. Guys like Stephen Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and James Harden are all examples of guards who took the power away from the bigs. But as we got later into the 2010s era, we saw the rise of many new generational big men. Guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, and Joel Embiid were all on a mission to reclaim dominance of the league. And these bigs were different from previous generations. As a result of positionless and guard-dominant basketball era that we're in, these big men adopted guard-like skills to fit into the modern-day NBA systems, like Giannis's one-of-a-kind mobility and athleticism as a current-day big man, Nikola Jokic's point guard-like feel for the game, the way he's able to facilitate an offense and get his teammates countless open looks, and Joel Embiid's smooth shooting stroke and his elite footwork and coordination. Giannis proved that this style of big men is successful, already having a ring to show for it at just 27 years old. These three players could very well start a new trend in the future of basketball where the center position is the dominator of the league, kind of like old times, but with a modern twist to it. Athletic bigs who are mobile enough and have a quality blend of perimeter skills along with their traditional interior low post skills are the future of the NBA. Like, you can't stop a 7-footer who can run and jump like a guard and have the strength and physicality of a center. It's literally a cheat code. With the past superstars like Curry, LeBron, and KD nearing their ends of their reign, with a combination of Embiid, Jokic, and Giannis entering their primes, there's no reason why this shift wouldn't happen. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content similar to this.